Hello, my name's Ben, and I have a problem. It's been going really well, and I've been off the stuff now for months. But last week, against my better judgment, I did it again. Yes, I've bought another BMW X3. So this is number 3 in the fleet. Having just sold the last one that you may have seen on my other video, I'll put a link here. I just happened to be at the local car auctions last week, not particularly looking for anything to buy, but happened upon this, tucked away amongst the other trash that's normally there. And but actually I could see some potential in this car, so had a little bid on it and ended up winning it. We'll discuss for how much later. But yeah, it's a really nice looking car. So it's another 2006, but it's a slightly later one. So it's this is what they call an LCI, so it's a facelift. It's the same colour as the last one, Titan Silver Metallic. This one happens to be an M Sport, so it's got all the body coloured trim that you won't have seen on my previous car, along with the 19-inch wheels. I've never really liked these much, but I'm actually getting quite fond of this one. But the most important thing about this car is these two little letters here. You probably can't read that from there, but it says SD. And that means that this car has got the twin turbo version of the mighty BMW M57 3-litre diesel engine. So that's the 6-cylinder, the ultra reliable one before they then went into the N series engines, and the less said about that the better. But yeah, so all the BMWs I've had before have been single turbos. This is a twin, so that's got me quite excited. Now it's really tidy looking, this car, considering that it has been around the block once or twice with 165,000 miles on the clock. But there are lots of little things on this car that let you know that it's been looked after by somebody who basically spared no expense. So in all the paperwork that I got with the car was the original bill of sale. List price for this car originally in 2006, £32,000. On the road price to the first owner, £42,000. So yes, they added £10,000 worth of optional extras. I don't quite know what they spent it on because it doesn't have heated seats or a sunroof or even electric seats. So where that 10 grand went, I don't know, but it's telling. The car also comes with 12 months MOT, but it also has genuine BMW floor mats, boot mat, tow bar, and battery. Who buys batteries from BMW unless they've got money coming out of their ears? But on top of that, it has a full BMW dealer service history, which is gold dust. On a car like this, with this complexity and potential cost, that's gold dust. So any issues that it may face, you can pretty much guarantee that they're not due to bad servicing and wear and tear from old oil, for example. But come and have a look and I'll show you the rest of the car and see what we got. Other than the nice condition, the first obvious giveaway on the outside of the car is that it's got premium brand tyres, and at 19 inches and God knows how wide, I'm sure they're not cheap. Never having bought any myself, obviously. I'm more of a fan of the Ling Long. Now, being an M Sport, there's a couple of interior differences as well compared to my previous X3s. You can see that this one's also got a lovely sumptuous black plastic interior. M Sports always come with the black headlining, which I really like actually, and had often toyed with the idea of wasting my time installing a black headlining on my green car, which may yet still happen. But also the M Sports come with a nice chunky real leather steering wheel, what they call Nappa leather. Nappa meaning real. Any other leather in a BMW is not leather, it's plastic. But other than that, the inside of an M Sport is much the same as an SE. Now, it's not immediately obvious, but some of where that poor person's £10,000 in optional extras went was firstly on phone connectivity. So there's a tray here for your phone to go into somehow. Don't know how that works, but basically ruins that top tray there forevermore. Has the lovely pop-up sat-nav system, which is so antiquated and out of date that I think it probably was when it was new, which also gets rid of another really useful cubby hole up here. But also this phone has Bluetooth connectivity. Not for music, no. Why would you want that? Just for phone. They were extremely unforward thinking back in 2006, and nobody could conceive of the concept of using Bluetooth to stream music from your phone. I suppose why would they? But in terms of optional extras, that's pretty much it. If I drop 10 grand on options, I'd want it to be real plush in here, especially heated seats. Who doesn't want heated seats? I love heated seats. Now, having said how tidy this car is, and it is tidy, that's not to say there aren't any issues. This car's got the ZF 6-speed automatic gearbox, which I've had problems with in previous cars, but I cannot fault it in this one. It's absolutely silky smooth. There's no rattles, knocks, warning lights, any of that. However, what the car does have is a distinct lack of power. Now, this car should have the power of 280 horses to gallop it up to 60 miles an hour in 6.2 seconds, which I think you'll agree is impressive even by today's standard. But at present, we're nowhere near that. If you just come and have a sit on my head, I'll show you what it's like. So it fires up and runs well. Let's go for a little spin up the road and I'll show you what I mean. Now the first sign that I think there's something wrong is that there's a fair bit of whistling. Admittedly, I've never driven a twin turbo one of these before, but knowing BMW as I do, I don't think that it should whistle that much. So that's another piece of evidence. I'll do a couple of miles just to warm her up, and then we'll do a 0 to 60 and I'll show you the problem. Just in normal driving, it seems okay. I dare say most drivers probably wouldn't notice much of a difference unless you're booting it. It seems to rev a little bit higher than a normal car. Lovely autumn day here in the UK. It's the 1st of November today, so Halloween last night. One benefit of living in the back end of nowhere, no trick-or-treaters. So I had to eat all the sweets myself. Interesting bit of history, the reason there's a fence on that side of the bridge and not that side. In the lead up to the Second World War, this was a main military route where loads of military hardware was brought along, and the tank transporters couldn't get over that bridge because they were too wide. So they hit the wall down and built a fence that's removable. Out the way, Mr. Squirrel! So another problem that this car has, which normally would have had me completely flummoxed thinking that there was a misfire, but because the previous one I had the same issue, I know that there's a transfer case problem with this car, which manifests as a jolting sensation, just like a misfire, when you're under load. So you start to put a bit of power on and you get a but, like a stuttering of power. So to isolate that out, I'm going to pull over, unplug the transfer case control module to just eliminate that from the equation. And because there's this ultra slow driver in front, we're not going to be able to do a 0 to 60. So let's put a bit of distance between us. That's the transfer case control module. So we just whip out. Probably don't need to take both connectors out, but I don't know which one's which. So there's one and there's two. Okay, so she is now two-wheel drive. So we should now have a suite of warning lights on the dash. So that's telling us that the ABS, stability control and four-wheel drive are no longer functional, but if my predictions be correct, smooth as a baby's backside. Yeah, so that's that problem isolated. We can sort that hopefully with a change of the transfer case fluid, like with the previous car. It warms up fairly slowly for one of these, so I think it may need a thermostat in it. But I have had it up to full temperature, so it's not running cold or anything like that. Okay, she's pretty much up to temperature now. Let's do a 0 to 60 to see how bad it is. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. $40, $50, $60. Well, there we are. That's like 60% slower than what it should be. So, big problem. There's a real lack of power in the bottom end, but then you get this kind of surge of power through the mid-range, 2,000 to 3,000. But above that, absolutely flat. It's the revs are climbing so slowly, and there's basically hardly any acceleration, which that part of the issue I have experienced before. On my first X3, when I bought it, it had a horrifically clogged DPF. Now these cars, they monitor the DPF, the pre-DPF pressure, but what they don't do is flag it as a warning light or go into a limp mode. All you get is a fault code, so you have to scan the car to know that there's an issue with it, other than the poor performance that you're getting. So we agreed, there's a problem. Now you won't be able to pick this up from the video, but the way this actually feels is that there's a distinct lack of power in the bottom end and the top end, but the mid-range is okay. It gathers a good bit of speed there from the sort of 1,500 to 2,500 revs mark, which I think could possibly be a key piece of evidence when we investigate this problem later. But before I start going off on wild tangents and developing theories about what it could be, let's scan it for fault codes and see what we've got and what we've not. So first things first, let's see if the car can tell us what's wrong with it. The software I use for this on BMWs is called INPA. So this is INPA, and knowingly it's all in German, but you can see all the different BMW chassis codes, and if I hold shift, you see down on F4 there is E83. So we go into engine, DDE6 for M57 TOP, that's the twin turbo engine, F4, F1 to scan for codes, and there we are, we've got 3 in the memory there. So again, it's all in German, but that one there is pretty easy to decipher. Particle filter system, so that's DPF, and these are the conditions at the time the fault was flagged. So these being the important ones, I think these are exhaust pressure. So that's like a bar of back pressure, which is wildly high. It should be down in the sub 100 millibar range, or probably way lower than that. But yeah, so that's definitely a clogged DPF. Again, there's another one there for particle filter. Number 3 will be the interesting one. So it's a 429A. So if I use my Bixby vision on that. There we go. Charging pressure control, low pressure level, rule fading. I'd say that was our boost pressure fault. So what were the conditions when that error flagged? Okay, so the engine was doing about 3,700 revs, coolant temperature 76 degrees, fuel rail pressure 1600 bar, boost pressure 1.9 bar, which is about right for max boost pressure. So so it's not reading low max. I think what it's reading probably is low transient boost pressure. What input can also do is show you live data from the running engine, which is what you can see on the screen here. So the top left is demanded boost pressure and the top right is actual boost pressure. So you can see the top left shoot up, which is when I bury my foot on the throttle, and then the top right lags some way behind, and that's the boost pressure building. And I think potentially that's where our issue lies. It's the speed at which the boost pressure is coming up, certainly in the bottom end, because it looks quite gradual. You should see a pretty rapid rise in boost pressure, which was the whole purpose of going from a single to a twin turbo on these things. So as I suspected, the lack of power above 3,000 RPM, so that's in the top end of the range, is due to a blocked DPF, which is exactly the same problem I had on my first X3, the green one. So for those that don't know, DPF stands for diesel particulate filter. So I'm sure we've all seen older diesel cars with black smoke coming out of the exhaust. Now that black smoke is actually made up of what's called particulates, and that's synonymous with diesel combustion. The two basically go hand in hand. So after, I think it was 2011 in the UK, they became mandatory to be fitted to new cars. But a lot of manufacturers fitted them much earlier than that, hence this being an 06 and having a DPF. So what a DPF is literally, as it says on the tin, is a filter which lives in the exhaust stream, and it captures all of those little particulates so they don't come out the back. Now that's great, but of course over time, with the accumulation of mileage, that soot builds up and becomes more and more of a restriction that the engine has to work against, because it's trying to pump all those exhaust gases out through what is essentially becoming a smaller and smaller hole. But the clever people at BMW knew this would become a problem, so they installed a feature into the engine management system to cope with that, and that's called a regen. Now, a regen is where the car attempts to burn off all that soot by injecting fuel late into the cycle. It enters the hot exhaust and combusts in the exhaust rather than in the cylinders. And that is in an attempt to burn out all that soot and turn it into something else which can pass through the filter, thereby cleaning it and reducing the restriction. Depending on how the car's been driven, has a significant effect on how regularly the DPF will become fouled. Coupled to that, the accumulation of another substance in the exhaust called ash, and that I believe is predominantly from the burning of engine oil, so where you get oil blowing by the piston rings and burning in the cylinders, where that comes out through the exhaust, which happens more so on modern engines because we want high efficiency, so we want lower engine friction, and to achieve that we have lower weight oils and also low tension piston rings, again for lower friction and higher efficiency. The price you pay for that is higher oil consumption and therefore faster fouling of the DPF. Now the ash doesn't burn off, and that will accumulate and just get worse and worse and worse over time. And I believe that is the key issue in why many cars get to a stage where the DPF cannot any longer be regenerated and is just a permanent restriction, which is where we are now. The only caveat to that on BMWs, especially with the M57 and probably other diesel engines, is that they have a penchant for blowing up their glow plug control module. And the glow plug system, which is essentially a set of little 12-volt electric heaters which live in each cylinder, so there's 6 of them, they're used as part of the regen system. So if they're not working, the car won't regen, and so the DPF just gets more and more blocked. And M57s, everyone that I've ever owned, the glow plugs don't work, basically, so it has minimal effect on cold start. They're a little bit slower to start, but other than that, generally you don't notice an effect on the rest of the way the car runs. But what it means is that it will foul the DPF quicker. So that's one problem that we've got to sort. So I think on this car, annoyingly, the DPF is much harder to get at because it's a combined unit with the cat, and it lives up next to the engine. On the older models, it was a separate unit that lived in the middle of the exhaust underneath the car, so it was dead easy to get out. So we'll have a look at getting that off and getting that cleaned. But we've also got this 429A fault code for something to do with the boost systems. So that's something else we've got to look at. Right, so let's have a look at the engine itself. So there it is, or there it is under this plastic cover. So that is an M57 TOP engine, and the TOP is some German acronym that relates to the fact that it has two turbochargers. So one here and one languishing down there. Now, because these twin turbo BMW engines are, the oldest ones are nigh on 20 years old now, they've started getting a bit of a reputation for being not so much unreliable, but having common problems associated with boost and turbos and things like that. And that's in no small part due to the control system that BMW opted for when they designed this engine. So the original M57 single turbo has vacuum controlled turbo. The boost control is vacuum operated. The later ones went to electronic control, and they're really robust, and they generally never go wrong. But for these twin turbo ones, they went back to a combination of vacuum and electronic control. So you have a vacuum system that controls the three main valves, air valves they are in the system, which in turn are controlled by a series of what BMW refer to as changeover valves and pressure converter valves. And those are little electronic valves which basically control where the vacuum is allowed to go and where it isn't, which in turn controls the main air valves. Now, it's really easy to look down there and get completely overwhelmed at what you're looking at, because it's not immediately apparent to a lot of people what you are looking at, and even more importantly, how it works. Even though you can identify a lot of the main components, you might not necessarily have any understanding of the strategy by which they're attempting to work. And I was in the same boat. I've had a little look at this car before making this video to see anything glaringly obvious, and I've got to admit it was a bit overwhelming because I'm not au fait with these at all. So I hopped onto Google, and as luck would have it, I happened upon an excellent document which actually comes from BMW, and I think was part of the training bump for technicians when these engines came out. And it relates to the four-cylinder version of this engine, the M47 TOP, which is basically identical, all bar having two less cylinders than this one. So all the information is completely transferable. But basically it goes through in detail the strategy by which this engine works, and specifically relates to the boost side of things and the valving and how that's controlled, how it defaults in the event of failure of various components and all that kind of stuff. So super helpful, but enables you to determine a much more efficient, logical path for fault finding and save a load of time potentially. So we'll have a look at that, and I'll show you what I've learned, and then dive into trying to fix this problem. So this is the document I mentioned I found on eBay. I'll spare you all the bump, but one of the most important things in here is a schematic of the system showing, most importantly, the exhaust side of the engine and the two turbochargers and how they're plumbed together. Because if you look at this from under the bonnet, it's just a pipe and wire monster. Obviously, the main components of this picture are numbered and labelled down below. So you get the proper BMW terminology for each of the valves and stuff, which can be useful when looking for bits. Most important of these components are numbers 5, 13 and 15. So that's the compressor bypass valve, the wastegate valve, and the turbine control valve. And these are basically three air valves that control how and when each turbo is used and how they interact with one another. I won't read it all out to you now, but in the following pages, there's a description of each individual component, how that works, and then an overview of the system and how it works dynamically as the engine goes from idle up through the rev range. So here's the table that condenses all that information, splitting the engine speed range into low, medium and high speeds. This tells you specifically when each valve is open and closed. So basically, at lower engine speeds, all three valves are closed. In the mid-range, the turbine control valve starts to open, but it's continuously variable, so it's neither fully open nor fully closed. And in the upper speed range, all valves are open. So if we go back to the schematic we were looking at before, so if you start from idle, you start to accelerate, all three of these valves are closed. So the exhaust gas has to flow through the small turbo or the high pressure turbo, then in turn through the low pressure big turbo and on out through the exhaust system. So this wastegate and this turbine control valve, they're both closed, so there's no bypass. This compressor bypass valve is also shut, so the incoming air is drawn through the big low pressure turbo and the small high pressure turbo. So you have the effect of both turbos in the low speed range. As you approach the mid speed range, this valve starts to open. So you're starting to bleed some exhaust gas through, bypassing the small high pressure turbo, because that's reaching its upper speed limit and becoming a restriction in the exhaust flow rather than helping. As you then progress on up through into the upper speed range, this compressor bypass valve opens so that the incoming boosted air is able to bypass again and not be restricted by the compressor wheel of the small high pressure turbo. So the incoming air takes this route into the engine. Then at the point you reach the maximum boost pressure, which I think on this engine is 1.95 bar, I think I read somewhere, the wastegate opens on the big turbo. So that is what actually limits your upper boost pressure. So there's a pressure sensor in the manifold that feeds back to the ECU and says, right, you've reached your upper pressure limit. This valve then opens, so any excess that would create more boost is bled off, bypasses both turbos, and down goes straight down the exhaust. So these three valves, 5, 15 and 13, they're all controlled by vacuum, which is generated by the vacuum pump on the engine, same as what gives you brake assistance through your servo. So hypothetically, if there was a leak in that system and we had no vacuum in there, none of these valves would work and they would just go to their default state, which for 13 and 5 is closed. But for 15, it works the other way around, and that default's open. And that is the mid-range state for these valves. So actually, that's what we've got. When we went on the test drive earlier, we had good mid-range performance, but bad low and high-speed performance. So that could be what's happened, that we've lost vacuum in the system. So that's probably the first thing to check. Equally, it could be a failure of the electric solenoid valve, which controls this valve here. So if that's failed in its closed position, so it's not allowing vacuum to come in and pull this valve closed for the low speed operation, that would cause the same effect. So if that's the case, what we should be able to do is swap the electronic control valves round on these two, and it should reverse the effect of the failure. So we should then get good low speed performance, but bad high speed performance, and the mid-range should be preserved. Now obviously that schematic is very good, but the components don't look anything like the ones that are actually fitted to the engine, and that's where this picture comes in. And this is an excerpt from a BMW parts website, and it allows you to see what the components actually look like. So when you're looking under the bonnet, you know which one is which. But let's go and have a look under the bonnet and see what we can learn. First things first, let's get rid of this strut brace and this cover, and then we can see what we're working with. There we go. Okay, so layout. So vacuum pump is here. That is the main feed or supply of vacuumness to the engine, and that is what goes to the brake servo through that pipe there and gives you the power assistance on your brakes. But also these little black lines, these are all common. So there's this goes down underneath the inlet manifold, there's a vacuum manifold, and then various little branches come off of that and go and do the various things. So you what's vacuum controlled? Swirl flaps, EGR valve, I think maybe EGR cooler valve, turbos, and probably some other stuff. Now these vacuum hoses can go bad and be quite common, but these look like silicone ones rather than the original rubber, so I reckon they've been replaced in the past, maybe in an effort to fix this problem. So you can see the small turbo up there now. That big unit there with the little rusty thing in front of it, that's the actuator that moves the, I forget what they call it now, the changeover valve, but basically the one that defaults open and is pulled closed by vacuum, but it's the first one to open as the revs build, and it's what allows the exhaust gas to bypass the little turbo and go straight to the big turbo. That's what that is, and I suspect that it's the solenoid valve that controls that which is at fault, and I think that's that little fella in there. I hope it's that one because that's the easiest one to get to. But getting back to basics, all of this works from vacuum. So the way I see it, the first thing we need to check is, have we got any vacuum? So let's do that. Right, luckily I have such a thing as a magical vacuum tester tool. Normally it's the other way around. It's for you've got a hand pump here, and it's for applying a vacuum to something to see if various things work. But in this case, I don't see why it wouldn't work for me to attach it to the vacuum pump, run the engine, and then if we've got vacuum, we should see it register on this gauge. Just need a way in somewhere. Right, that's attached. I'll go and start the engine. You keep your eye on the gauge. Oh, biscuits. Nothing. Unless I'm doing something wrong, I'd say we got no vacuum. Nothing. Okay, well I wasn't expecting that. Because I was connected to the wrong place, isn't it? Watch this. There we go. Loads of vacuum. Okay, so that's the first thing we now know. We're generating vacuum. So I'll put this back to as it was. What we now need to check for is a vacuum between the solenoid valve and the high pressure turbo bypass valve. I've forgotten the proper name already. Basically the wastegate for the small turbo, because that defaults open. In the lower speed range it's vacuumed shut, so at idle we should have a vacuum there keeping it shut. Of course it would be the case that the one I want to check is the most difficult one to get at. So basically what I want to do is take the vacuum hose off of the top of this canister here and put our gauge on, and at idle we should get a vacuum, but there's no slack on it at all. So I'm just trying to work out where it comes up to, and if I can, for want of a better phrase, pull it off somewhere else. This is handy when half the bolts are missing. Cuts down the working time. There'll be another one missing by the time it's finished, I think. Just makes life a bit easier taking that lot out, so you can get this rear part of the engine cover off and get to the vacuum stuff on the back. There we are. Come with me and I will show you. I think it's where that line there disappears off to after that T-piece. Or is it that one? Okay, the one we want is that solenoid valve there. That's the one that I suspect is at fault. So this is the inlet side of it, and that hose there is the outlet side going down to the whatever it's called, bypass valve. So if we pop that off and then reapply our magical vacuum gauge thing like so, start her up, and we should see vacuum there now, but hopefully we won't see it, because then we'll know that that's what's the problem. Keep an eye on that for me, if you would be so kind. Annoying. So that's saying that the solenoid valve's okay, so low speed performance should be good according to that, because that's saying that the other one's in fact. Of course, downstream of that, the thing that could be at fault is the actual valve itself, the bypass valve. So if I now pump our vacuum gauge up, if I connect this to the other end, bear with. So now we're vacuumly connected to that thing there, so as I start to apply a vacuum, oh yeah, easy. Well, nothing wrong with that. So I'd say that part of the system, the high pressure turbo bypass side, is okay, which is really annoying because we've got bad low speed performance. One last thing we can try on that side of things is to just bypass that solenoid valve completely and run the vacuum line straight down to the changeover valve, so it will be sucking that valve closed the whole time, just in case there's something funky going on with that solenoid valve. So we'll do that, run it up the road, see if it makes a difference on performance. So that is going straight down to there, completely bypassing that solenoid. I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up, but you get a lot more engine noise with that scuttle thing out for the pollen filter. Just go down to the main road and then give it a bit of a bootful down there. See if it has made any difference. You won't be able to tell from the video, so I'll show you my face and I'll use that to let you know whether it's worked or not. Something's happened. Wouldn't change gear then. It definitely feels faster. Right, I'll go down, turn around, put it into manual mode so we can eliminate whatever weirdness the gearbox is doing and go back in the other direction. Wait for this motorbike to go by. Oh, another one. And a car. And some more cars and some people. In your own time. Concentrate on the road, love. Oh, I might have to follow suit. A dawdler. We'll go up into fourth, so we're low down in the rev range, so it was absolutely flat down here. So if I back off and leave a bit of space, there we are. So we're about 1300 revs. So if we boot it now, I'd say that's an improvement. I think that's a definite improvement. Why are you braking? Right, so that's full throttle, not much, and then, yeah, real punch there. It's pulling a lot stronger above 3000 revs as well than what it was before. Yeah, it's much better. Still a little bit lacking in the bottom end, if I'm honest, but... And I don't know what the gearbox was up to, but let's put it back into automatic and see if that's solved itself. Yeah. Into sport mode. Weird, I don't know. Going worse then than it was in manual mode. See, dead, there it comes in. No, I don't think we've got it. Well, that was not a clearer result as I would have hoped for. After initially thinking that we'd had some effect, actually I don't think we have. So I have got a new one of those solenoid valves that we can swap in there to see if that makes an effect, but I think the way we've tested it, it should have shown up a bigger result than that, so I'll hold off on that for a while. The other one of those solenoid valves is here, and that one controls the wastegate for the big turbo. So what we can do is tee into that, run the gauge inside, drive it up the roads just to see if that one's kicking in, because of course that one kicks in up in the rev range, so you can't do it when it's sat here. So let's do that now. That's the beauty of having this great big long vacuum line. You can run it into the cabin for a bit of dynamic testing. Okay, what could possibly go wrong with that? Okay, so now all we've done there is tee into that line. So when that valve opens, we should see it register on the gauge inside. Right, we're just coming to quite a long, steep uphill now, so that's full throttle. There we go. Right, that's the wastegate open there, limiting boost pressure. So that is working. Right, let's get back and find something else to test. Okay, I just pulled over and swapped the gauge round back onto the, teed it into the supply to the changeover valve, and so we should now see the opposite effect. So there we're seeing the vacuum that we saw at idle, and as we boot it, we should see that one close down. Oh yeah, that one's definitely working. Whereas definitely opening and closing, I thought it was meant to be a little bit more gradual than that, but what do I know, I'm just a doctor. Okay, so there's one more to test, a solenoid a straight solenoid valve now, which is meant to behave more like that one's behaving, as far as I know. And that's the one that controls the compressor bypass of the high pressure turbo. So I'll just familiarise myself with the layout of the pipework, and then we'll test that one. Right, my head's starting to hurt now. I thought this was going to be easy. We're going to try and test the third valve now, which is the compressor bypass valve. Slightly different type of solenoid valve. That one there. Right, so we should see this open in the mid-range somewhere. There we go. So that looks like to me that is working fine. So obviously that one seems to be working fine too. So we'll get back. I'll scratch my head for a bit. You go make a cup of tea and we'll reconvene after. Well, that hasn't gone the way I planned it. The good things are that we've tested a few things that appear to be working, but the annoying thing is that we haven't found anything that's not working yet. The only thing I could potentially point at that's got a question mark on it is the solenoid valve for the turbine control valve, because that was kind of working in a binary way, whether it looked like it was either on or off, and to my mind that should be more gradual than that, but I don't think that would have the effect that we're seeing. So maybe it does just work quickly like that, I don't know, but it's dark now anyway, so I'm gonna have to draw a line under it for today, go away and do a bit of head scratching. And obviously we had DPF faults when we scanned it earlier, and I know on 2 previous X3s that I've had that clogged DPF causes poor performance above 3,000 revs, which is definitely what this car has, but it wouldn't necessarily explain the low down loss in performance. So, but maybe we switch from the boost side of things onto the DPF, eliminate that. So just literally take the exhaust off for now and run it up the road and see what happens there. And maybe that fills in the top end performance and leaves the bottom, or maybe it has some effect on that as well. So I think perhaps maybe that's the next thing to try. But yeah, I'll go away and do some thinking about it, and then we'll reconvene, and I'll see you soon.